You stink like garbage. Wife tells her husband he's a garbage collector and asks for a divorce. Years later, she finds him and cries at his feet. Hello. Welcome. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The streets were deserted, and only the light from the street lights and the moon illuminated the street. Pedro worked as a street sweeper and went out collecting the city's trash at night. He liked his job. For a few years he was in need, but he got this job. After hours of work, the man could finally return to the arms of his beloved girlfriend. It wasn't a special date, but Pedro wanted to give his girlfriend a gift. He went to the nearest florist, bought a bouquet of flowers and some chocolates for her. In the morning he arrived and found her having breakfast. "Good morning, my love. I brought you a present," he said kindly. "What did you bring?" Deborah asked, not seeming surprised. "I brought chocolates and flowers," he replied. Deborah smiled, but Pedro felt it was forced on her part. He took the flowers and chocolates and placed them on the table. Then he went towards her and tried to hug her, but Deborah moved away. "Pedro, you stink." Pedro walked away. "I'm sorry, my love. I'm going to take a shower," he said. He took a shower and soon after returned to his beloved. However, Deborah had already left for work. She didn't even touch the flowers or chocolates. They were in the same place that Pedro had left them. The young man took the flowers, put them in a jar, then put the chocolates in the refrigerator and went to sleep. Despite living together, the couple only saw each other for a few hours a day, since Pedro worked in the early hours of the morning and Deborah in the morning and afternoon. Pedro felt his girlfriend pulling away from him and tried everything to keep the relationship going, but it seemed that all his attempts were in vain. The next day they met again in the morning, and this time Pedro brought her a teddy bear, but Deborah acted the same way, and when he went to hug her, Deborah said that he smelled and asked him to take a shower. When she came out of the bathroom, Deborah was still at home, but she was ready to go to work. "Honey, I want you to buy me that ring I sent you last week, and also a designer dress. My best friend's birthday is next month, and it's going to be at a fancy place. I don't want to embarrass myself." Pedro looked at her with his sleepy eyes and said, "Yes, my love, I'll look for them on my day off." Pedro went to bed and, even though he was sleepy, the man looked up the price of what Deborah wanted on his cell phone. My God, he thought. Both the dress and the ring were too expensive for Pedro's salary as a street cleaner. And besides, Deborah wasn't going to help pay for anything. When the weekend came, Pedro was honest with her and said that he couldn't buy either item because they were too expensive for him. Deborah was upset. "All my friends' husbands gift them bags, shoes, jewelry, and I don't get any of that, just flowers and chocolates," she said irritably. "But honey, this is what I can afford," Pedro said in a worried tone. "Besides, I also have to put up with this smell every day," she added. Pedro was thoughtful. His work was not easy, but no one had ever complained about his smell. Furthermore, even after taking a shower, Deborah would push him away, saying that he did not look well. The couple argued for a few minutes, and Deborah went for a walk, saying that she was irritated. Pedro was left alone at home thinking about what he would do. Deborah didn't know something. He had a small amount of money saved for emergencies, and with that money, he could buy whatever she wanted. But he was confident with his money and didn't consider it an emergency. However, the fear of losing Deborah made him rethink. He decided to buy both the ring and the dress, but besides being left without money, he would have to get an extra job to be able to pay for all of this. When Deborah returned, he said he would buy everything. The woman smiled and hugged her boyfriend. Everything seemed fine now. Pedro, in addition to working at night as a street cleaner, got a job at a fishmonger's near his house. His father was a fisherman and taught him how to treat fish. He needed these two jobs to be able to afford Deborah's luxury. The woman, instead of showing gratitude, moved even further away from her boyfriend. "You already smelled like garbage before. Now you also smell like fish. Sleep in the living room." Deborah knew that everything he did lately was to pay for her luxuries, but the woman didn't care. Pedro tried to understand his girlfriend's side and agreed to sleep in the living room, since the job at the fishmonger's was only for a month. The man was getting more and more tired. It seemed like he had aged years in just 1 month. The few hours of sleep and the excess work took their toll on Pedro. He was thinner and got sick often. The day of the party had arrived. Deborah looked truly stunning in the dress and the ring. "I'm going, love. I don't know what time I'll be back," she said. Pedro said goodbye to Deborah and went to work. While he was working as a street cleaner, he realized that he wasn't even invited to this party. He tried not to care and just focus on his work. However, he was very tired from working so hard for the past month. Finally, his body cried out for help, and while he was working, Pedro fainted. His co-workers called an ambulance, and he was rushed to the hospital. When he woke up, the doctor told him he was severely anemic and would need to stay in the hospital for a few days. While he was in the hospital bed on N4, Pedro asked the nurse, "Please call my emergency contact." The nurse looked around and for some reason said yes, but her tone of voice was strange. The emergency contact was Deborah, but she was at her friend's party. Pedro felt something strange. Will she come see me instead of the party? So he waited. No one showed up. The next day came, and Deborah gave no sign of life. Pedro was tired both on the outside and on the inside. It wasn't until the following evening that she showed up at the hospital. Deborah acted casually, saying that he seemed much better and that she hadn't come to visit him because she was tired from the party. In the half hour that she spent with him, Deborah only talked about herself and the fun she had had. Pedro was disappointed, but he didn't want to fight. He was too tired for that. After 4 days, Pedro was discharged. He returned home alone, but Deborah was not there. Pedro thought it was strange. At that time, she was supposed to be home. Pedro lay down on the bed and slept for a few minutes. Suddenly, he woke up to a sound coming from the living room. He couldn't make out what it was, but as he got closer, he realized it was two people talking. "Come, don't be afraid. He's not here. He's still in the hospital." It was Deborah's voice. "Is this your boyfriend's house?" "It's very simple. If I had known, I would have taken it to my house. It's much bigger and more comfortable," a male voice said. "He doesn't earn much. I don't feel anything for him anymore. I don't even know why I'm still here. Every time he tries to kiss me, I tell him he stinks, but the truth is that I just don't want to have much contact with him anymore. I wished I had a prosperous man by my side, but what I got was him," Deborah said in a tired voice. "You're with him because you want to be. On the day of the party, I said that I fell in love with you. The night we spent together was great. If it weren't for the hospital calling you directly, it would have been even better," he said. Deborah sighed. "I'm not a doctor, that's why I didn't go. I wouldn't help him at all. I'd rather spend the night with you than in a hospital." The man laughed and said, "You made the best choice, my dear. I earn a good living. I'm a businessman, I can handle the world. That dress and that ring he bought for you, I can buy dozens in a day. You know I'm much better than him." Pedro felt a shiver run through his entire body. He couldn't believe it. What he heard next made him approach them. When he heard the sound of kissing, Pedro shouted, "Deborah, how could you?" Deborah and the man were startled, but soon calmed down. The man looked at Pedro and then at Deborah. "I'm going to the car. Now it's time for you to make your choice." The man went to the car and closed the door. Deborah and Pedro looked at each other. Without saying anything, Deborah also walked out the door. Pedro was alone, sick, weak, and full of debts caused by Deborah. He regretted having worked so hard to the point of getting sick in order to please her. The following days were filled with complete loneliness and sadness for him. Everything was intensified when some people sent photos of Deborah in a boat next to the same man from that day. Pedro cried. For a moment, he felt small and belittled. When he returned to work, he was no longer the same. Everyone noticed the change in his behavior. He was more withdrawn, quiet, in contrast to the old Pedro, who was happy and communicative. But Deborah would still be a shadow in his life. Having spent too much on her all this time, Pedro was drowning in debts that he didn't know how to pay off. The only way he found was to look for another part-time job. He also thought it would be better this way. The more time he was busy, the less time he would spend thinking about her. But this time he would take care of his health. It wasn't long before he found a job as a car washer at a car wash. It didn't pay much, but if he saved up that money, he could pay off his debts in a few months. Work became a refuge for him. The constant tiredness made him forget about his ex. Pedro, As soon as he finished his work at the car wash, went to a small house in front of the place. It was a small family restaurant where just an elderly woman and her granddaughter ate meals and served customers. As tired as he was, Pedro felt comfortable in that small place. Larissa always served him and delivered a hot and tasty meal. There was something special about those dishes. I've eaten at several places, and I can say that their food is incomparable. Larissa smiled and thanked me. My grandmother taught me. She always cooked very well and taught me everything about cooking. Pedro was curious and asked more about that woman's life. Larissa lost her parents in a car accident when she was just a baby. It was considered a miracle that she survived. Since then, Larissa has been raised by her maternal grandmother. The young woman tried to lighten the load on her grandmother, who was still working hard at 70. Pedro found himself smiling as he spoke to Larissa, but suddenly he felt the weight of the past weigh on his shoulders. A voice told him that people were not to be trusted, that any other woman could do what Deborah had done. He then frowned and ended the conversation, saying he had to leave. Larissa said goodbye. The man couldn't get that woman out of his mind. For a few months, he did not return to the little restaurant. Peter had gotten out of debt and was calmer. Finally, he felt as if the shadow of his father had disappeared from his life. Pedro also no longer needed to work 2 jobs, so he resigned from Lava Jato. As he was leaving the place, he looked at Larissa's small restaurant and, knowing that he would never return to that area, he decided to try her food one more time. But to his surprise, the house was closed. He looked inside, but soon Larissa appeared. Larissa said that they were going to close it permanently, as they could no longer afford to pay the rent for that house, which was very large, and they would move to a smaller one. But that smaller one would not be enough to set up the restaurant. "If you know of any job openings, I'm looking for them," she said with a sad smile. Pedro also noticed Larissa's grandmother sitting in a rocking chair with a sad look. He looked at the house and thought. There was a partition where 2 families could live without disturbing each other. Pedro looked seriously at Larissa and said, "I have a proposal for you too." The grandmother suddenly stood up from her chair and paid attention to what he was going to say. 2 months later, Pedro, Larissa, and their grandmother were living in the same house. Pedro proposed paying half the rent for them. He would live in the upper part of the smaller house and pay other bills such as water and electricity. In exchange, he could eat at their restaurant every day for free. Larissa and her grandmother accepted the offer, and the 3 of them made good use of this partnership. Pedro kept his end of the deal, but he went further. He constantly helped the 2 women, whether washing dishes, mopping the floor, or even serving customers. Soon Larissa and her grandmother asked him to become their partners. The addition of Pedro helped to increase the potential that the restaurant had. 5 years later, Deborah was wandering the streets. A sense of anguish was tugging at her heart. The woman was desperate for a job anywhere, but she had no qualifications, and most jobs would pay little compared to what she was used to earning from her ex-boyfriend. After Deborah left Pedro to live with another man, the woman lived a life of luxury and wealth. She traveled to many countries, experienced different cultures, went to parties, and always bought designer clothes and expensive jewelry. Her new boyfriend provided her with all of this, and she loved this lifestyle. However, their relationship fell apart overnight. After 2 years of dating, her rich boyfriend simply dumped her for a prettier, younger woman. Deep down, he didn't like Deborah and stayed with her only for her outer beauty. Since then, the woman has lived a difficult life. She rarely held a job, as she was not used to earning a minimum wage per month. She used to spend it in just one day. But her situation had reached a desperate point, and she could no longer choose what she wanted. Her rent was late, and she would soon be evicted from her home. The woman barely had enough to eat. Desperate, she went to several establishments asking for a job, but found only closed doors. A sign caught her attention. "We are hiring cleaning services." Deborah entered the place and looked for someone in charge. It was a restaurant, and it was quite busy. Among the employees, one person caught her attention. It was Pedro. He was carrying a tray with the customers' orders. When they looked at Deborah, they were both astonished. After serving the food, Pedro called Deborah to a more private place. The two were silent for a while until Deborah spoke. "It's been a long time since we last saw each other. I'm looking for a job, and I saw a sign that they're hiring. Could you help me by referring me?" she asked. Pedro, despite his past, remained calm and said, "I'll see what I can do, but I don't think it will work because someone was hired this morning. They should have taken down the sign in front of the restaurant by now." Deborah sighed. "Well, I see that neither of us have made it in life. You a waiter, and I an unemployed woman." Pedro looked at her and felt a mocking tone from his ex. "Actually, I'm not a waiter here. I'm just covering for one of our employees who had to leave because his wife is in labor. I'm the owner of this restaurant." Deborah laughed. Pedro didn't care. "Goodbye, Deborah. Good luck finding a job." Before she left, one of the employees called her boss and said that they needed help receiving some products. Deborah asked the employee, and he confirmed that he was the owner of the restaurant. Not only this restaurant, he and his wife own 5 restaurants and will soon increase the number, said the waiter. Deborah immediately ran after Pedro. He was outside receiving a truck with supplies for the restaurant. She saw that the man was rich, cried with regret, and knelt at his feet, begging them to come back and that she had changed. Pedro picked her up and said that what they had was over, and he knew she was just wanting his money. "You begged for us to get back together and not for the job. That proves you just wanted my money," he said. In the middle of the confusion, Larissa appears and Pedro explains who she was and what was happening. Larissa for everything Pedro went through because of his ex. Now Pedro and Larissa were married, and she was in a dilemma. "Okay, I'll get you a job, but it won't be at that restaurant. This restaurant is run only by my husband. It will be far away, so neither he nor I will see it again." Deborah thanked him, but deep down she felt angry because she wanted to be with Pedro, who was now rich. Larissa gave her the address of the restaurant and said that she would be hired and that she could leave. As she walked away, Deborah saw Pedro and Larissa hugging, but something made her cry again. A terrible feeling of regret passed through her soul. A 4-year-old boy ran towards them and shouted, "Daddy, Mommy." Deborah realized that Pedro was a rare man and that she had this rare jewel by her side, but she threw it away. She walked away and would rethink all her actions from now on. I hope you enjoyed the story. Like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching.